Hello and welcome. Today is June 25th, and you're watching another episode of TV on TV. This is State Representative Tommy Vitolo. We're on Brookline Interactive Group, and we've got another great show for you today. This week, I will be sitting down with Massachusetts candidate for Congress in the 4th District, Chris Zannetos, out of Wellesley. We're going to talk for about 25 minutes, but first, the week in review, specifically as it relates to politics and governmental change, still in this era of COVID. The changes are happening a little bit more slowly, but they're still quite meaningful. And I want to begin with the quiet sort of lack of announcement that Phase 3 has been delayed at least a week. Phase 3 includes the reopening of things like gyms, casinos, sort of some high-touch areas. And that's been delayed at least a week. And we're going to talk about why in just a moment. Also, bars were pushed back to Phase 4. They will not be opening in Phase 3. They will be opening in Phase 4. And this relates to the reality that even though our numbers in Massachusetts are looking pretty good, and the Southeast and the West numbers are looking terrible and getting worse, we do have a few troubling anecdotes or even data sets that I want to highlight, if only to remind all of us that we need to continue to do an excellent job. The first thing I'm going to do is show you this chart, and this is the chart of cumulative and daily hospitalizations. And so when people come into the hospital, right, these blue bars get taller. When people leave, they get shorter. And for the most part, you'll see these bars are actually below zero because most days, more people are leaving the hospital than coming in. And to be clear, and a bit morbid, people enter the hospital one way through the front door. They leave the hospital in either one of two ways, either hopefully reasonably healthy and out the front door, but sometimes, and let's be honest, many people are dying due to COVID. They leave out the back door. So between the different ways one can leave a hospital and the only way you can enter a hospital, the net change tells us, are our hospitals getting more full or less full? And that gives us some sense of whether or not we're beating COVID. After all, it is the hospitalizations, the people who are quite sick, that we are most worried about. And so if you notice, going back to May 10th and even before that, the numbers are falling steadily. Every day that goes by, between 50 and 100 people most days are leaving the hospital. Wednesdays we see bumps because of the way reporting works, but we see a steady decline until about June 12th. And then it really flattens out. For the last 10 or 11 days, net hospitalization has fallen only slightly. We've sort of hit a plateau, a downward plateau. And this is troubling, right? We really do want to get our net hospitalization down as low as possible. After all, that means that we have a smaller and smaller number of people who are very sick. And that's what we'd like to see. These numbers are not showing that for the last 10 or 11 days, and that's a cause for concern. Another cause for concern are what we see with our own eyes. And I'm going to pick just briefly on the North End, but we're seeing it in more than just the North End. Restaurants, as they're opening, are not abiding by the rules. Their wait staff are not abiding by the rules. Their customers are not abiding by the rules. Tables need to be 6 feet apart. No more than 6 people are allowed at a table. Wait staff need to be wearing masks the whole time. Customers need to be wearing masks when they're not sitting at the table. If you're waiting for a reservation, you've got to be 6 feet apart. You can't be huddled together. These rules are important. ISD in Boston had a meeting with North End restaurateurs yesterday via Zoom and laid this very clearly. Inspections will begin today. If the businesses that are allowed to open now can't do a good job, not only will we not be able to push forward, we may have to revert backward. And that's a real tragedy. We really do want to get out of this and get back to our traditional way of life the best way we can. folks need to do a great job. And that means that you, as a viewer, can do a great job. You can make sure you're wearing your mask. You can, a little bit of shame for others when they're over the line, particularly, if it's a business that is forgetting all of its rules. You might mention that as a customer. Businesses are sensitive to their customers' opinions on things. So we all have a role to play. Most importantly, our role is to do best by ourselves and our family and make sure that we as individuals are making good decisions when it comes to public health. So phase 3 is a little bit delayed, and the numbers aren't declining as quickly as they were. We're still in pretty good shape. I'm optimistic, but we need to keep at it. The Globe had an article this morning. It's not officially out yet, but the story in the Globe is that the governor will release the Department of Early and Secondary Education, DESE's recommendations for going back to school. And these are still a little soft. Not everything here is final. My understanding about today's announcements is that it will, number one, not include a 10-child per classroom limit. This has been floated, and it's incredibly difficult to pull off. And this recommendation will not include that. It will include a requirement for masks on all people, grade 2 and up, and that includes, of course, faculty, staff, and so forth. Desks must be 3 or more feet apart. The ideal is 6 feet apart, and the expectation is that they'll be facing forward, no clumps or groups. Really, you don't want kids looking at each other where that sneeze is all the more dangerous to spreading of disease. It is likely that lunch and breakfast will be eaten in the classroom. That doesn't mean that cafeterias will have no use, but as you can imagine, a cafeteria is designed to fit quite a large number of students in a relatively small space. That's not how we do things these days. At this time, there is not expected to be a mandated temperature check, nor mandated COVID testing. Of course, that could change, and of course, individual schools or school districts may have the ability to add requirements that aren't in the DESE guidelines. And again, this is reported from the Globe. This is not finalized. Things can still change between now and September many times, but we're trying to get a good idea of how this is going to play out. The last thing I want to report is the Massachusetts House of Representatives was in session yesterday, and we had a big vote. We voted on $1 billion supplemental budget related to the CARES Act, the Federal CARES Act, where the federal government is providing some money, not enough, but some money to states and local governments to try to meet their really urgent and important needs stemming from COVID. And so here's what we voted yesterday. We voted $350 million spending on PPE. We voted $44 million spending on contact tracing. We voted $20 million to address some of the racial disparities that we see in COVID. The fact of the matter is, this disease is hurting and killing Black and brown people at a faster rate than white people, and there's a couple of different ideas why. Nevertheless, not good. So we're going to try to work on that the best we can. It includes $10 million for homeless shelters who are really struggling under COVID. As you can imagine, we can't put people as close together. And for a homeless shelter, that's making it really difficult for them to meet the needs of their clients. And finally, $2 million have been assigned for nursing home employee testing. Very important. In addition, there was money spent that is not that is related to COVID, but not on direct COVID expenditures in the same way. So, for example, $93 million for human service incentive pay, $45 million for early ed employees, $20 million for residential assistance for families in transitions, known as RAFT, and $5 million for child nutrition. The other thing we did yesterday, and I want to thank my colleague, Bud Williams, who has had a remarkably challenging last few months. Bud Williams filed an amendment. We voted on it separately and passed it unanimously. If the Massachusetts House of Representatives has its way, Juneteenth will be a state holiday. And I'm really excited about that. It's long overdue. I know Rep. Williams has been working on it for a long time, and I'm absolutely delighted that we're moving in this direction. There's clearly much more to go, but this is a step in the right direction. And now, here on Brookline Interactive Group, I'm excited to introduce you to candidate for the seat currently occupied by Congressman Joe Kennedy, candidate Chris Zannetos, running for MA4. So let's get right to the interview. Hello and welcome. My name is State Representative Tommy Vitolo, and I'm recording on Brookline Interactive Group. I've got a great guest today, Chris Zannetos, candidate for Congress. As you know, we have a Democratic primary and a Republican primary. Both are on September 1st of this year, and they're competitive. Turnout is going to be really important. I encourage everyone to vote. You can vote by mail. You can vote in person. Make sure you get out and vote. But I don't want to spend too much time talking about that. I want to spend my time talking with Chris Zannetos. So Chris, thank you for joining me and welcome. And I hope you can just tell us what you've been up to since, I don't know, birth in 2019. What brings us to this point?
Sure. Thanks, Tommy. And again, thank you for inviting me and all the other candidates for the Congressional Representative Office here in District 4. I appreciate it. Sure. So I'm a Massachusetts guy. I was born in Boston, grew up in the suburbs, went to school at MIT, started and raised my family here in the Boston area and in our district here in District 4. I grew up with a lot of opportunity and privileges. My father emigrated here with $100 in his pocket and a scholarship to a school that went out of business after his first semester. Somehow he and my mother, who was also born here in Boston, of a Portuguese father who immigrated here from the Azores, and someone whose family had been here for a long time, since the 1600s. And you know, they taught me a lot of things, my parents. But one of the most important things was that we have a responsibility and accountability to our community to help it improve and improve life for everyone in it. And that's really stuck with me. Certainly my parents did that as educators, and that's what they taught me to do. Now, I went to MIT, as I mentioned, and that sort of propelled me into the tech world, where after a few years working out for a company that was acquired by EMC, I eventually started 3 companies of my own. All technology companies, 2 of them cybersecurity companies, and very proud that with a lot of hard work and a lot of help from a lot of great teammates, we built some great companies, eventually creating hundreds of jobs for people here in Massachusetts, and $250 million of salary for people here in Massachusetts. But, you know, along the way, it really became so apparent to me, you know, I call it sort of peeled away the layers of ignorance about the obstacles that other people face. And it really became apparent to me how hard it was for some people to access these sort of opportunities, not only the educational, but the job opportunities as well. And along the way, I started with my second company, working with a school in Jamaica Plain. And we really learned an awful lot about the kids and the challenges they faced, and you know, brought the kids into the company to learn about what tech jobs were available, that they were welcome, that we wanted them to join us and be interested in math and science, but also just the you know, the lack of resources, no lab tables, no science tables, etc. This eventually led me to start up a nonprofit called STEM Match, which works with schools in marginalized communities to connect 6th graders in particular with technology companies to get that exposure to the opportunities that are available to them, but also works with Mass Bay Community College and some great companies like State Street Bank and Harvard Pilgrim Health on their 1-year cyber certificate program to make an experiential learning process and a program that actually can be a feeder for people to access these great jobs without requiring a 4-year college degree, which of course 70% of our people can't afford. So I've been focused a lot on those areas, and I've just been very distressed to see these obstacles for people achieving a better life than the generation before them just keep on growing. And I've seen our Of course, our wage, our opportunity gaps, these just grow dramatically during a time when we had just such a great economy. And that's really what spurred me to look at running for this office. Is I just feel that we just don't have the people in Washington who understand the drivers, the educational drivers, and the business and the job drivers that we need to change to reduce these obstacles for people who've been marginalized from being able to attain these opportunities. And I'm happy to talk further about that, but there are so many opportunities that are just unfilled right now.
Sure. So there's a lot in there to unpack, right? You really talked a lot about job creation and development, talked a lot about education, and had we not been through the last 3+ months of COVID, those are really complex questions. And so what I'd like to do is actually acknowledging COVID, sort of maybe talk more long term, and then we're going to dial it back to what do those things look like in the short term under COVID. So first, sort of more long term, what should we be doing as a society? What should Congress be doing around workforce development? And how do you prioritize who on the employer side and who on the employee side is getting that focus?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So, and looking at the long term, and I very much do want to pull it back to what we have to do today, because we've got some harsh realities of today. But I will go actually back before COVID, right? Before COVID, we had 9,000 chronically unfilled jobs here in Massachusetts in cybersecurity. We could not fill them at all. And they went unfilled. And eventually companies might fill them in other parts of the country or even other parts of the world. And the reason that they were unfilled is because companies were consistently out there looking for people with 4-year college degrees. And when I look at our challenges, and when I look at the opportunity gap, which has created so much frustration, disenfranchisement across our country, but in our district and in our state as well. The real issue is that our businesses have been creating jobs that are accessible to only 30% of our people. And that's just not acceptable. So we have to incent them, we have to challenge them, we have to enable them to create jobs that everyone can access. We have to get the foundational education to people so that they can access those jobs. And these aren't just tech jobs, right? Technology is changing every industry in our country. It is transforming them. And as I said, the businesses have got to create what we are beginning to call new collar jobs. Jobs like cybersecurity, where you don't have to be a math whiz, you don't have to be a science expert, and you don't have to go to a 4-year college to actually access it if you have apprenticeships, internships that enable you to get that experiential learning. This is a program that a pilot program that I created working with Mass Bay and a bunch of great local companies to build this sort of pathway to these sort of jobs. But cybersecurity jobs, user experience design, environmental science technicians, biotechnicians, all of those jobs really don't take and require a 4-year college degree. So what Congress can do is invest heavily in our post-secondary education and our vocational education to enable these 1 to 2 year programs, certify them, focus on the areas where we know we're going to need jobs. All those areas I mentioned, we have millions of unfilled jobs in the United States. So build incentives and challenge companies to create those pathways and work collaboratively with our educational institutions to embed that experience in the process. Those are things that I think that we can do at the back end of the process. Through the rest of the process, through K through 12, we have got to invest like we did back when we were losing the space race against the Russians, which is before my time, but I've read about it, right? Where we invested heavily in math and science education to give the foundation for us actually to win the moon race, to get to be the first to land on the moon. We need to do the same thing today. There is an opportunity for us to create millions and millions and millions of jobs, some of which are already created, and enable our people now to get access to it. And I think that is the most important investment that our people in Congress can drive. But unfortunately, there are only 6 people in Congress who have any experience with this part of the economy and technology that drives it. There are more radio talk show hosts than there are technologists in Congress. So one reason that I decided I felt compelled to run is because I have this experience around creating these jobs, around the technology, and around the educational approaches that can create these new pathways. We just have to change the type of people we send down there.
Well, you've got me wondering how many public access television show hosts are down in Congress.
That's not what I meant.
That's a conversation for another day, to be sure. So let's dial the time period we're thinking about to be much more near term, right? We have just dramatic unemployment across the country, across a wide variety of sectors because of our self-imposed economic and cultural distancing and restrictions necessary, in my view, to tamp down this virus. How do we get things moving again? And maybe more broadly, how do we find the balance between immediate economic productivity and public health and safety?
Oh, wow. There are like 4 questions in there. You'll have to stop me if I haven't covered all of them. But that's a big, big question. So let me start with a view of 1 + 1 = 3, right? So I'm also an entrepreneur, and I'm the only entrepreneur in this race. And one of the things that we learn as entrepreneurs, and don't tell my old professors at MIT I said this, which is your alma mater too, as I recall, 1 + 1 = 3, right? We believe that we can create something from nothing, and that we can create something that everyone can win with, right? That our investors can win, our staff, our customers, and the community, right? Because typically we're creating these companies to improve the community and our life in some way. Very different than the zero-sum game down in Washington. Well, I think this is necessary now with the pandemic, right? I mean, let's be honest with ourselves. We had a $1 trillion deficit last year, the first time ever. Massive. This year we're going to have, I don't know, a $6 to $7 trillion deficit, and it's necessary. We have to make sure that people, particularly those who are from lower income communities, have enough money to feed their family, to clothe their family, to have shelter. Unfortunately, once again, those that are in the tougher situations in our community are the ones who hit the hardest by this. People who are in jobs where they have to work multiple jobs to support their families, where they're not already earning a livable wage. Those, unfortunately, are the people most impacted by the layoffs, by the closings of the companies, et cetera, as well as, of course, our family-owned businesses, which have had a very tough time. So, but I think that we can create a 1 + 1 opportunity if we invest wisely as we drive out of this pandemic and the economic disaster that's accompanied it. One way that we can do that is by driving smartly to achieve the goals around climate change and reversing those and achieving zero emissions by 2050. We can invest in things like public transportation and affordable housing nearer where jobs are in a way that improve people's lives, create construction and other jobs, but also reduce our emissions. We can invest in clean energy technologies. In the wind farm that's down planned for off of our coast that we hope will continue to get to fruition, and all of the manufacturing and businesses surrounding it. I don't know if you know, actually you probably do know, right, that every wind turbine in the United States is imported from Europe. Right? Well, why? This is going to be a growth industry. Why wouldn't we invest in this? Why wouldn't we invest in this in our district in Massachusetts? Create some incentives to actually start manufacturing turbines here in the United States and in our district. It's going to be a growth industry. So I think that we can make investments there. There's a lot of talk around investing in infrastructure to create jobs as we come out of this. I want to make sure that we invest in the most important part of our infrastructure, our people. There will be, as you mentioned, there are millions and millions who are out of work. and there will be millions out of work for, unfortunately, for some time. I've led a company through 2 major recessions, including the '08 Great Recession, supposedly a once-in-a-lifetime event. I know how companies think about this and how they plan and grow. And it will be a while before we get back to where we were. In fact, an MIT economist just recently predicted 2030 by the time we actually get back to where we were in terms of employment. Well, what should we do? Let's invest in our people. Let's create a GI Bill-like effort to make community college and other training around these new collar jobs affordable, and frankly, with a forgivable loan, free. If they go through, they graduate, and they go into the industry, let's forgive their loans. Within 2 years, the government will make back all the money that they spent on making it a forgivable loan. That's a win-win. Our people can get trained. They can get trained for these new jobs that are high paying, that can help them lift up their families. And in the short term, it's not going to cost us any money.
I love it. I think that's really helpful to be talking about that and really bringing together a couple of different areas. One thing we haven't talked about yet, but I know is on everybody's minds, is how this talk about economic development and how talk about COVID interplays with the Black Lives Matter movement. Right? It's been a huge topic of conversation over the last month, and a critically important one. And I think, I can imagine how these things might connect, but I'd like you to, if you could, explicitly connect the dots between the things that you've been thinking about since long before a month ago, since long before 3 or 4 months ago when COVID became our reality. Connect the dots between economic development and recovery and the Black Lives Matter movement for us.
Sure. I would say that there are a couple of different ways that we have to connect the dots, right? First of all, I would say that I'm hopeful. I mean, the past few weeks have been very sad and disturbing, but also I think for me, hopeful that we will finally take real action to address racial prejudice, how it's embedded in our institutions, how it creates obstacles for our fellow citizens of color from achieving what I call the American dream that my family has been able to achieve. The ability to have the opportunity to do better than the generation before. I think it is essential for us to understand that we cannot truly have social justice without economic justice as well, right? So as we look to take this opportunity and drive progress around policing, and I'm fully in support of the Justice and Policing Act that Senators Booker and Harris have put forth down in Congress, we need to reform our processes and do everything we can to pull as much of the embedded racism out of our policing and justice system as possible. But we have to go further. If we do not go further to break down the other barriers for people of color to access this opportunity in our country, then we're not achieving social justice. And when you look at it, unfortunately, when it comes to the pandemic, when it comes to the environment, when it comes to income, our fellow citizens whose skin color is black or brown are far over proportionately counted amongst those that are suffering from poor health care, from the impact of the pandemic, from poor environment, and from other barriers related to income. And I think we have to address all of them. Just one example of just seemingly to some of us might be a small thing, but is so important from the perspective of accessing education is internet access, right? Our lower income communities have very poor internet access. And again, those communities are predominantly brown and black. They need that to access the sort of learning. Don't tell, I won't say which of my kids it was, but one of my kids learned calculus basically on the web, even with the great schools that we have in our town. Well, kids in lower income areas and the vast majority of our fellow citizens of color, they can't access that. That's unacceptable. the government has actually created a subsidy for this through the CARES Act. Fantastic. For families of income 135% or lower of the poverty level, you get a subsidy for internet access of $9 a month. Well, that's not going to do anything. We have to break all these barriers. And I will tell you, from my own personal journey, working with schools in Boston, with my nonprofit and with my last company, it just made apparent to me how many of these things, everywhere I looked, I found these sort of obstacles. And again, on top of that, our people of color in our country, they face the additional obstacles of racial prejudice and racism that's embedded. So we have to be aggressive to attack all of these to truly get to social and economic justice. And that's what I'm focused on doing.
Thank you. And I'm glad you brought up healthcare. And I know you had been talking about it more broadly than just around COVID. And so I'm wondering if you can sort of think through for us more broadly about healthcare, where the next Congress should really be focusing efforts around healthcare, whether it's access, whether it's a particular scheme to pay for healthcare, whether it's a particular affliction. Talk to us about what in healthcare you think warrants where we're going next.
So there are a number of areas. So first of all, I would share that from my perspective, right, we are the world's richest country, and for us not to have millions and millions of Americans covered with healthcare insurance and have access to quality healthcare is just a disgrace. We have to have universally available healthcare insurance and quality healthcare services accessible. Two different things. I'm a strong proponent of truly investing and expanding Obamacare to where it has been planned to be, but has been stopped from achieving. We need to provide a safety net for anyone who cannot afford quality health care to get it. I also believe that we should have a public option to enable anyone to join in, and that Medicare should be free to negotiate drug prices to drive down these drug prices. So I believe that we have to invest there. But again, I think we've got to recognize that this is a systemic issue. So I learned from working with my last company with 30 of the top hospitals in the US that the reality is everyone's getting some level of care. The problem is they're getting the wrong care at the wrong time. And it actually is more expensive for us. We have people with problems that could have been solved earlier with preventative care, but they don't have insurance, so they show up in the emergency office when it's an acute problem. And when I talk to my friends who are in administration for some of our top hospitals, they tell me we could save 20% of the cost of this if people actually had preventative care. So we've got to focus on how we ensure everyone has quality preventative care, but we also have to make sure they have access. So many people from lower income areas cannot get to their hospitals effectively and easily, or their doctor's offices. They have to take multiple buses, change lines, et cetera. So if we improve public transportation, we can actually improve access to health care. We've also got to look at where our hospitals are and invest and give incentives for hospitals to open up in the areas where there is not strong access, which tend to be in our more rural and our lower income urban areas. We also have to look at the issue of food deserts, right? If people can't get access to fresh and healthy produce and foods, their health is going to be worse. There are just so many different ways we have to understand how we can help our people get access to what they need to have a healthy and happy life.
Chris Zannetos, bottom of the ballot, hopefully at the top of our minds and hearts. Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us about a wide variety of issues about economic development, about some education reform, about COVID, about healthcare. There's a lot going on. It's clear your experiences certainly inform your vision for what the MA4 congressperson could be doing in the future. Again, thanks for coming on. Thanks for watching on Brookline Interactive Group Television. And I wish you the best of luck. It's been a real pleasure getting to know you, and I hope that we continue to work together.
Thank you, Tommy. I do as well. It's been great joining you. And as I said, thank you for this. You worked with all of us on getting signatures as well. And it's I think it's a real value to your constituents, just to help all of us just get our messages out and so people can know who we are.
Thank you so much, Chris. Again, I'm Tommy Vitolo. You're watching Brookline Interactive Group, and have a wonderful democracy. Be well.